The holographic display bathed Admiral Jessica Thompson's face in an eerie blue glow as she studied the incoming signatures, thousands of them, materializing at the edge of the solar system like a swarm of angry hornets. Her grip tightened on the command chair's armrest, knuckles whitening beneath her weathered skin. "Status report," she commanded, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. Lieutenant Maria Reyes, her tactical officer, responded without taking her eyes off her station. "Counting 10,473 vessels. Admiral. Energy signatures match Kraxan warship configurations from our deep space probes. Size distribution suggests one primary command vessel, roughly 2,000 heavy cruisers, and the rest appear to be support craft and destroyers." Thompson nodded, processing the information. The Hyperion's bridge fell silent save for the soft hum of quantum processors and the occasional beep from monitoring stations. Through the reinforced viewport, Jupiter's massive form loomed in the distance, its swirling storms a stark reminder of the cosmic scale they operated in. "Time to intercept?" Thompson asked, already knowing the answer wouldn't be good. "At their current velocity, they'll reach Earth's orbit in approximately 6 hours. Reyes replied. "They're moving fast, but their formation suggests they're not trying to hide their approach. This is a show of force." A slight smile tugged at Thompson's lips. "Of course it is. They want us to see them coming, to feel helpless." She stood, straightening her midnight blue uniform with practiced precision. "Open a channel to Earth Defense Command." The main screen flickered to life, revealing the stern face of Fleet Admiral Chen. His expression was grim, but Thompson caught the glint of determination in his eyes. "Jessica, I assume you're seeing what we're seeing." "Yes, sir. Over 10,000 vessels, making no attempt at stealth. Classic Kraxan tactics. Overwhelm with numbers, demand surrender, then occupy." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "Sir, request permission to initiate Operation Looking Glass." There was a moment of silence as Chen consulted with others off-screen. The operation was controversial, not because it might fail, but because if it succeeded, it would change the nature of space warfare forever. Dr. Brooks and her team had warned them about the potential consequences of revealing such technology too soon. "Permission granted," Chen finally responded. "But Jessica, make it count. We won't get a second chance at surprising them with this." "Understood, sir." Thompson's pulse quickened as she turned to her crew. "All hands, battle stations. Lieutenant Commander Watson, bring the quantum drive online. Lieutenant Reyes, signal the fleet, initialize quantum anchor points, and prepare for synchronized field generation." The bridge erupted into controlled chaos as her orders were relayed. Warning klaxons sounded throughout the ship, and the deck plates hummed as the experimental quantum drive spooled up. "Ma'am," called out Watson from his station, "quantum field stabilizing. All safety protocols are green. We're ready." Thompson took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. Everything they'd trained for, every simulation they'd run, had led to this. Their fleet of 200 ships against an armada of over 10,000. On paper, it looked like suicide. But then again, the Kraxan had never encountered quantum displacement technology. "Send this message to all Earth vessels," Thompson commanded. "Initialize Looking Glass protocols on my mark. Remember your training. What they're about to see isn't just an illusion, it's a new reality." As her words echoed across the fleet, the first messages from the Kraxan fleet began arriving. Standard demands for surrender, threats of annihilation, exactly what their intelligence had predicted. Thompson allowed herself a small smile as she thought about the confusion that would soon replace their arrogance. "All ships reporting ready, Admiral," Reyes announced. Thompson stood, her figure casting a long shadow across the bridge. "Then let's show them why you should never judge Earth by the size of its fleet. Execute Operation Looking Glass. Now." Commander David Martinez felt a familiar tingle as the quantum field enveloped the Artemis. Through the bridge viewport, he watched the first salvo of Kraxan energy weapons, Brilliant purple streams of superheated plasma tear through the void where his ship had been a fraction of a second earlier, or perhaps still was, or would be. The quantum state made such distinctions meaningless. Status of the quantum anchors. He called out, keeping his voice steady for the crew's benefit. The Artemis, being one of Earth's newest scout ships, was chosen specifically for its advanced sensor suite and maneuverability. Lieutenant Sarah Wells, his science officer, responded with the practiced calm of someone who had run this scenario in simulations hundreds of times. Anchors are holding at 99.8% efficiency, sir. We're successfully generating 15 distinct quantum echoes across local spacetime. The bridge crew watched in amazement as their tactical display showed the Kraxan fleet's increasing confusion. Their targeting systems, designed to track ships moving through normal space, were having fits trying to lock onto vessels that existed in multiple states simultaneously. They're adapting their targeting algorithms, Wells reported, her fingers dancing across her holographic interface, attempting to predict our quantum shift patterns. Permission to initiate Phase 2. Martinez nodded, suppressing a grin. Do it. Let's show them why humans never stop reading science fiction. He opened a channel to the rest of Echo Squadron, the 6 scout ships under his command. All vessels, prepare for quantum entanglement. Pattern Delta 7. The view outside shifted dizzyingly as the Artemis quantum drive synchronized with its sister ships. Now, instead of each vessel generating its own separate echoes, their quantum fields began to overlap and interact. To the Kraxan sensors, it would appear as if dozens of scout squadrons had suddenly materialized throughout their formation. Incoming transmission from the Kraxan flagship, announced Communications Officer Jack Romano. Audio only. They sound frustrated. Put it through, Martins ordered, already anticipating what he'd hear. A harsh, metallic voice filled the bridge. Earth vessels, your deceptive tactics will not save you. Cease these illusions immediately or face complete annihilation. They still think we're using holograms, Wells said, shaking her head. Their doctrine doesn't even allow for the possibility of what we're actually doing. Martinez watched as another barrage of Kraxan weapons fire passed harmlessly through 3 of their quantum echoes. The energy beams continued into space, missing their actual position by several kilometers. Send telemetry data back to Admiral Thompson. They're reacting exactly as predicted. The deck vibrated slightly as the quantum drive adjusted to maintain their complex position in spacetime. Outside, the massive Kraxan vessels, each one nearly the size of a small city, began breaking their tight formation, trying to isolate what they perceived as the real human ships from the fakes. Sir, Wells called out suddenly. They're launching fighters. Hundreds of them. Quantum field is having trouble maintaining coherence with so many small, fast-moving objects in play. Martinez leaned forward in his chair. This was the moment they'd prepared for. Initiate Quantum Protocol Epsilon. Let's show them what happens when they try to saturate a probability field. He switched to the fleet-wide channel. Echo Squadron. Execute scatter pattern. Remember, we don't need to shoot them down. We just need to make sure they can't shoot us. The quantum drive hummed louder as it shifted to its secondary configuration. Now, instead of creating multiple echoes of the Artemis, it began manipulating the space around the incoming fighters. To their pilots, it would appear as if distance and direction had become fluid concepts. First fighter squadron is breaking off, Wells reported, triumph evident in her voice. Their pilots are experiencing severe spatial disorientation. They can't distinguish up from down anymore. Martinez watched as the Kraxan fighters began peeling away, their formation dissolving into chaos as they struggled to cope with space itself, seeming to bend around them. None had managed to get close enough to even attempt a weapons lock. Send word to the Admiral, he ordered. Phase 2 is successful. The Kraxan's tactical doctrine is falling apart exactly as Dr. Brooks predicted. We're ready for Phase 3. Outside, the stars seem to shimmer as quantum fields ripple through space, turning the battlefield into a kaleidoscope of possibility. and proving that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't the size of their fleet, but the power of their ideas. Dr. Emily Brooks paced before the curved wall of holographic displays in the United Defense Council's secured chamber, her boots clicking against the polished floor. Above her, real-time footage showed the ongoing battle, with Earth's vessels appearing to multiply and shift like reflections in a cosmic hall of mirrors. As you can see, she gestured to a particularly complex interaction between quantum fields. The Einstein-Rosen mass displacement field isn't just working. It's exceeding our theoretical models. Her voice carried the barely contained excitement of a scientist watching years of research prove itself in spectacular fashion. General Marcus Reynolds leaned forward in his chair, his weathered face illuminated by the dancing lights of quantum echoes. In English, Doctor, what exactly are we looking at? Brooks pulled up a simplified simulation. Imagine throwing a stone into a pond, she began, generating a ripple pattern in the hologram. Now imagine that each ripple doesn't just disturb the water, but actually creates new ponds, each with its own stone and ripples. Our ships aren't just moving through space. They're creating multiplicative possibilities of where they could be. The chamber fell silent as a new tactical overlay appeared, showing a Kraxan cruiser firing at what it thought was an Earth vessel, only to have its weapons pass through empty space while the actual ship appeared briefly behind it. The beauty of it, Brooks continued, her eyes gleaming, is that these aren't illusions. Each quantum echo represents a real possibility, a moment where our ships both are and aren't in that specific location. The Kraxan can't effectively target us because, in a very real sense, our ships exist in multiple places simultaneously. Admiral Chen, watching remotely from the EDF command center, spoke up. Doctor, we're receiving reports that some Kraxan ships are starting to target their own vessels by accident. How is that possible? Brooks nodded eagerly. That's actually one of the most fascinating aspects. The quantum field doesn't just affect our ships. It warps the space around them. When the Kraxan fire at what they think is an Earth vessel, there's a probability that the space their weapons travel through has been folded in such a way that they hit their own fleet instead. She pulled up another display, this one showing the complex mathematical equations underlying the system. We're not just fighting them with superior technology. We're fighting them with probability itself. Every shot they take has to traverse a maze of quantum possibilities. Their targeting computers simply can't process the variables fast enough. And our ships? Counselor Diana Foster asked. How are our crews handling these quantum effects? Remarkably well, Brooks replied, bringing up crew performance data. Thanks to the neural interfaces and extensive training, our personnel have adapted to thinking in quantum terms. They're not just pilots anymore. They're probability navigators. Each crew member intuitively understands that their ship exists in a state of quantum flux, and they've learned to use that to their advantage. A new alert flashed across the displays. Brooks quickly expanded it, revealing footage from Commander Martinez's encounter with the Kraxan fighters. Look here, this is exactly what we predicted. The fighters' pilots, trained in conventional space combat, literally cannot cope with an environment where distance and direction become probability functions. What about the strain on our quantum drives? General Reynolds pressed. How long can we maintain this advantage? Brooks's expression grew more serious. The drives are performing within expected parameters, but we're pushing the boundaries of our understanding. Each ship generates its own quantum field, which then interacts with the fields of nearby vessels. The more complex these interactions become, the more energy we need to maintain stability. She brought up a power consumption graph. We have maybe 4 hours at current usage rates before we need to start cycling ships out to cool their drives. But she added with a slight smile, given the Kraxan's current state of disarray, I don't think we'll need that long. The chamber erupted in urgent whispers as new battle footage appeared, showing entire sections of the Kraxan fleet starting to break formation, their carefully planned attack dissolving into chaos as they fought an enemy that seemed to exist everywhere and nowhere at once. We've done more than just develop a new defense system, Brooks concluded, watching the display with quiet pride. We've changed the fundamental rules of space combat. The question now isn't whether we'll win. It's how the galaxy will adapt to what we've just unveiled. Supreme Commander Vexthor slammed his armored fist into the tactical display, causing the holographic image to flicker momentarily. The bridge crew of the Dominion flagship Inexorable Destiny flinched at the sound, their scaled skin rippling with anxiety. "Impossible," he roared, his secondary breathing vents flaring with rage. "Our initial scans showed 200 vessels. 200. He gestured violently at the chaos displayed before them. "Now our sensors detect thousands, yet our weapons pass through them like cosmic dust." Strategic Officer Killeran approached cautiously, her ceremonial armor clicking softly against the polished deck. "Supreme Commander, we've analyzed the sensor data from 16 different ships. The humans appear to be using some form of advanced projection technology." "Then target the energy sources," Vexthor cut her off. "Find the real ships generating these phantoms." That's the problem, sir." Killeran brought up a new display, showing energy readings that seemed to defy the Dominion's most advanced scientific principles. "Each signal we detect appears to be both real and unreal simultaneously. When we adjust our targeting systems to compensate, the readings shift. It's as if the humans have found a way to exist in multiple states of reality." The massive view screen showed another failed attack run. A squadron of Kraxan heavy cruisers fired a coordinated barrage at what appeared to be a cluster of Earth vessels, only to have their energy beams pass through empty space. The human ships seemed to flicker and multiply, appearing briefly in dozens of locations before solidifying behind the Kraxan formation. "Sir," called out Sensor Officer Zexkal, 3 more squadrons reporting critical targeting failures. "The humans, they're not just appearing in multiple locations. The space between our ships, it's becoming unpredictable. Squadron 7 just fired on what they thought was an Earth vessel and hit one of our own destroyers instead." Vexthor's facial scales darkened with fury and something he hadn't felt in centuries. Fear. The Kraxan Dominion had conquered 12 star systems through overwhelming force and superior numbers. Their tactical doctrine was built on the principle that a larger fleet would always triumph over a smaller one. But now, "Show me the original scan again," he demanded, his voice quieter, but no less intense. The holographic display shifted, showing the initial reading of Earth's fleet. 200 ships scattered across their solar system in what had seemed like a pathetically weak defensive formation. "What are we not seeing?" he muttered, more to himself than his crew. "What principle of physics are they exploiting that our ancestors dismissed?" A sudden commotion from the sensor station drew his attention. Zexkal's hands were flying across his console, his scales pale with disbelief. "Supreme Commander, we're detecting," the readings suggest. "It's as if their ships are creating folds in space itself." The tactical display updated, attempting to represent what their sensors were detecting. The space around Earth's vessels appeared to bend and ripple, creating patterns that made Vexthor's inner eyelids snap shut reflexively. It wasn't just that their weapons couldn't hit the human ships. Reality itself seemed to be conspiring against them. "New energy spike detected," Killeran announced. "Massive quantum fluctuations across multiple sectors." Vexthor watched in growing horror as more of his carefully positioned fleet began to break formation. Centuries of military doctrine were crumbling before something that shouldn't be possible. A memory surfaced from his early tactical training. "Beware the younger races, for they have not yet learned what cannot be done." "Sir," Killeran's voice was barely a whisper. "The humans, they're not using any technology in our database. They've developed something entirely new. Our numerical advantage means nothing if we can't even determine where their ships truly are." The Supreme Commander of the Kraxan Dominion stood silent, watching his mighty fleet flounder against an enemy that seemed to mock the very laws of physics. His people had spent generations perfecting the art of space combat, developing strategies based on immutable cosmic laws. But now those laws were being rewritten before his eyes by a species his people had dismissed as barely worthy of conquest. "Send word to all ships," he finally ordered, his voice heavy. "Begin implementing emergency protocol Omega-9. If we cannot determine what is real." He paused, watching another squadron fire uselessly at quantum echoes. "Then we must change our understanding of reality itself." Lieutenant Ryan O'Connor's neural interface hummed against his temples as he merged his consciousness with the Thunderchild's quantum systems. The destroyer's bridge fell away from his awareness, replaced by a vast geometric landscape of probability and possibility. Here, in this quantum-visualized space, he could feel the movements of the Kraxan fleet like ripples in a cosmic pond. "Pattern Mobius is primed," he announced, his voice distant to his own ears. "Ready to execute on your command, Captain." Captain Laura Hayes watched her quantum helmsman with a mixture of pride and concern. The neural interfaces were crucial for navigating quantum space, but the strain they put on their operators was immense. O'Connor's face was covered in a sheen of sweat, yet his hands remained steady on the crystalline control surfaces. "All ships reporting ready for Pattern Mobius," Communications Officer Peter Nash reported. "Admiral Thompson has given the green light." Hayes nodded. "Begin the sequence, Lieutenant. Let's show them what happens when you corner a species that grew up reading about impossible things." Through his neural link, O'Connor reached out to the other quantum helmsman across Earth's fleet. In his mind's eye, he saw the battlefield as a vast three-dimensional chessboard, except the pieces existed in multiple states simultaneously. The Kraxan fleet's movements appeared as bright lines of probability, their rigid formations a testament to their inflexible thinking. "Initiating primary quantum fold," O'Connor announced. The deck hummed beneath them as the Thunderchild's advanced drive began manipulating space itself. "Secondary and tertiary fields are stable. Beginning Pattern Mobius in 3, 2, 1. Reality shimmered. To the Kraxan, it would appear as if the human fleet had suddenly developed the ability to be everywhere at once. But this was different from their earlier quantum echoes. This time, they weren't just creating possibilities. They were weaponizing them. First insertion point successful. Tactical Officer Maya Rodriguez called out. "We've got ships materializing inside their defensive perimeter. Their close-range weapons can't track us at these speeds of quantum shifting." O'Connor's consciousness expanded further into the quantum field, feeling the movements of every ship in the fleet as if they were extensions of his own body. Through the neural network, he coordinated with other helmsmen, creating a dance of impossibility that was as much art as it was warfare. "They're trying to establish a new defense grid," he reported, watching the Kraxan's desperate attempts to adapt. "Switching to secondary probability matrices. Now." The Thunderchild seemed to split into dozens of quantum states, each one as real as the last until observed. The Kraxan's targeting systems, already struggling with the basic quantum echoes, were completely overwhelmed by the new pattern. Their shots passed through empty space as Earth's ships existed in all possible locations until the moment of attack. Multiple Kraxan vessels reporting spatial disorientation, Rodriguez announced with a hint of satisfaction. "Their fleet formations are breaking down completely. They can't maintain tactical coherence when they can't even trust their own sensor data." Captain Hayes watched as a massive Kraxan cruiser fired its main weapons at what it thought was the Thunderchild, only to hit one of its own support vessels. The quantum field had folded space in such a way that the shot had traveled in a perfect loop. "Status of the quantum drive?" she asked, noting O'Connor's increasingly strained expression. "Drive is holding at 87% efficiency," he managed through gritted teeth. "The new pattern is demanding." But he managed a tight smile. "It's worth it to see their fleet trying to fight shadows." The tactical display showed the full extent of their success. The once mighty Kraxan armada was now scattered across several light minutes of space, their formation shattered by their inability to cope with an enemy that treated space-time itself as a weapon. "Message from Admiral Thompson," Nash announced. All ships are to maintain pattern Mobius for 3 more minutes, then prepare for the final phase. Hayes nodded, watching as another section of the Kraxan fleet fell into disarray. 3 minutes should be enough. I don't think they'll ever look at a small fleet the same way again. Through his quantum-enhanced perception, O'Connor felt the truth of those words. The Kraxan had come expecting to find a primitive species with a handful of ships. Instead, they'd found humanity at its most innovative, turning their greatest weakness into an advantage that rewrote the rules of space combat itself. Science Director Zinthar's laboratory aboard the Kraxan flagship had become a chaos of holographic displays, each one showing increasingly impossible sensor readings. His research team, the finest minds in the Dominion, worked frantically to understand what their instruments were telling them. "It defies everything we know," Zinthar muttered, his crystalline data monocle reflecting cascading streams of information. "Every principle of space combat we've developed over 10,000 years, rendered meaningless in hours." Senior researcher Mel Carey approached with a new data crystal, her scales shifting to the deep blue of scientific fascination despite their dire situation. "Director, we've completed the quantum probability analysis. You need to see this." The main holotank flickered to life, showing a 3-dimensional model of what appeared to be a single human vessel. As they watched, the image split into multiple overlapping versions of itself, each one simultaneously real and unreal. "By the first stars," Zinthar breathed. "They're not creating copies or projections. They're—" He paused, his scientific mind rebelling against what he was about to say. "They're existing in quantum superposition. Every ship is in multiple states until we try to target it. That's not even the most disturbing part," Mel Carey added, adjusting the display. "Look at the space between their quantum states." The hologram zoomed in, showing twisted corridors of bent spacetime connecting the various positions of each Earth vessel. A violent shudder ran through the flagship, causing several researchers to stumble. Through the laboratory's observation window, Zinthar watched as another squadron of Kraxan ships fired on what they thought was a human destroyer, only to have their energy beams emerge from an impossible angle and strike their own vessels. "They're not just moving through space," he realized, his voice barely a whisper. "They're moving space itself. Every time we observe them, we force their quantum state to collapse, but they're controlling which state becomes reality." The laboratory's central computer chimed with new analytical results. Mel Carey's scales paled as she read them. "Director, the human vessels, they're generating quantum fields that interact with each other. The complexity is increasing exponentially. Our targeting computers would need to process more variables than there are atoms in the galaxy to predict their actual positions." Another scientist rushed over, clutching a datapad. "New readings from Squadron 9. The humans are doing something different now. The quantum fields are folding in on themselves." Zinthar expanded the new data onto the main display. What he saw made his primary heart skip a beat. The human fleet wasn't just existing in multiple states anymore. They were somehow maintaining multiple quantum superpositions simultaneously, creating a cascading effect that made it impossible to determine what was real and what wasn't. "Look at these energy patterns." Mel Carey pointed to a particularly complex set of readings. "Their ships are generating quantum entanglement fields. When we target one vessel, we're not just dealing with its possible positions, we're dealing with the combined possibilities of their entire fleet." The flagship shuddered again, more violently this time. Emergency alerts began blaring throughout the laboratory as more Kraxan vessels reported critical failures in their targeting systems. Some were beginning to experience spatial distortions so severe that their crews couldn't tell which direction was forward anymore. "Send this analysis to Supreme Commander Vexthor immediately," Zinthar ordered, his scientific excitement warring with the growing realization of their vulnerability. The humans haven't just developed new technology. They've discovered principles of physics that our civilization abandoned as impossible millennia ago. He turned back to the main display, watching as the human fleet executed maneuvers that shouldn't have been possible in normal spacetime. Their ships seemed to dance through reality itself, each movement multiplied across countless quantum states, turning the battlefield into a maze of probability and possibility. "We thought we knew the limits of space combat," Zinthar said softly, more to himself than his team. "We thought our understanding of physics was complete. But these humans, they never accepted those limits. They looked at the impossible and asked why not." As if to emphasize his words, another series of quantum fluctuations rippled through space, causing the very fabric of reality around their fleet to shimmer like heat waves over desert sands. The humans weren't just beating them. They were rewriting the rules of the universe itself. Admiral Jessica Thompson watched the tactical display aboard the Hyperion as pattern Mobius reached its crescendo. The Kraxan fleet, once a perfect formation of overwhelming force, had devolved into scattered groups of ships firing desperately at quantum ghosts. "Status report," she commanded, her voice steady despite the waves of fatigue washing over her. Maintaining the quantum field for this long was pushing both crews and ships to their limits. Lieutenant Reyes responded, her hands dancing across her console. "Kraxan fleet cohesion is down to 12%. They've lost effective command and control over 60% of their vessels. We're detecting multiple instances of friendly fire incidents in their ranks." Through the neural interface, Thompson felt rather than saw the strain on her quantum helmsman across the fleet. They were running out of time. Status of Lieutenant O'Connor and the other quantum pilots. "Neural load is approaching critical levels," Chief Medical Officer Dr. James Harrison reported from his station. "Another 10 minutes at most before we risk permanent damage to their neural pathways." Thompson nodded grimly. They'd known this would be the cost of maintaining such complex quantum states. "Begin synchronized withdrawal to Phase 7 positions. Signal all ships. Prepare for final convergence." As her orders transmitted across the fleet, a new alert flashed on the main display. Multiple high-energy signatures detected. Reyes called out, "The Kraxan flagship is charging what appears to be some kind of desperation weapon." The massive alien vessel's hull was splitting open, revealing something that made Thompson's blood run cold. "Analysis," she demanded. "It's some kind of space-time disruptor," Science Officer Dr. Karen Mitchell reported, her voice tense. "They're trying to stabilize local space-time forcibly. It could collapse our quantum fields if they succeed." Thompson's mind raced through the possibilities. This was the moment Dr. Brooks had warned them about, when the enemy would resort to desperate measures. But they'd prepared for this too. "Signal the Thunder Child and Echo Squadron," she ordered. "Execute Quantum Protocol Omega. Everyone else, maintain your fields but prepare for emergency phase shift on my mark." Through the viewport, she watched as the Kraxan weapon began to emit a strange, rippling distortion. Space itself seemed to quiver around their flagship as they attempted to impose normal physics on the quantum battlefield. Lieutenant O'Connor's strained voice came through the comm. "Thunderchild, engaging Protocol Omega. Captain Hayes reports all systems go. Echo Squadron in position." Thompson took a deep breath. What they were about to attempt had only been tested in simulations. "Begin quantum field convergence. Let's show them what happens when you try to cage infinity." The effect was immediate and spectacular. As the Kraxan's weapon attempted to stabilize spacetime, the Thunderchild and Echo Squadron began generating opposing quantum fields deliberately out of phase with each other. The result was a cascading wave of quantum interference that turned the flagship's own weapon against it. "Quantum cascade spreading," Mitchell announced, her voice filled with scientific awe. "The Kraxan weapon is amplifying our field effects instead of canceling them." On the tactical display, Thompson watched as the space around the Kraxan flagship began to twist in impossible ways. Their attempt to impose order on chaos had backfired spectacularly, creating a feedback loop that magnified the quantum distortions exponentially. "All ships, emergency phase shift. Now," Thompson commanded. Earth's fleet smoothly transitioned their quantum states, sliding between the ripples of distorted spacetime as the Kraxan flagship's weapon overloaded. The enemy vessel's desperate gambit had failed catastrophically. Not only had it failed to neutralize Earth's quantum advantage, but it had also created a temporary quantum storm that was now ravaging their own fleet. Ships that had maintained formation were now being tossed about like leaves in a hurricane of probability. Quantum helmsman status, Thompson asked, watching the chaos unfold. They're holding, Dr. Harrison reported, but we need to end this soon. The neural load is becoming critical. Thompson nodded, her expression determined. Signal Admiral Chen. Tell him we're ready for the final phase. She turned to her bridge crew, seeing the same mix of exhaustion and resolve on their faces. The Kraxan came here expecting to find an easy conquest. Instead, they found out what happens when you push humanity into a corner. Let's finish this. Supreme Commander Vexthor stood amid the wreckage of his tactical center, watching as his mighty armada continued to dissolve into chaos. The quantum storm created by their failed weapon had finally dissipated, leaving behind a fleet in shambles. Nearly 1,000 ships had suffered critical systems failures, and countless others had sustained damage from friendly fire incidents. Supreme Commander, Kyloran's voice was heavy with defeat. We're receiving a transmission from the human flagship. They're requesting to speak with you directly. Vexthor closed his inner eyelids, remembering the arrogance with which he'd delivered his own ultimatum mere hours ago. Put them through, he commanded softly. The holographic display flickered to life, revealing Admiral Jessica Thompson. She looked exhausted but resolute, her uniform slightly disheveled, but her bearing unmistakably that of a victor. Supreme Commander Vexthor, she began, her voice clear and strong despite the fatigue evident on her face. I think we've both seen enough destruction for one day. You've proven your point, Admiral, Vexthor responded, his scales shifting to the deep green of acknowledgement. Your technology, your understanding of quantum mechanics, it surpasses anything we thought possible. Then let's talk about tomorrow, Thompson proposed. Because we both know this battle has implications far beyond our two species. The tactical display behind her showed Earth's fleet returning to normal space, their quantum fields powering down. It was a gesture of trust, or perhaps merely confidence. Their 200 ships now appeared exactly as they had at the beginning, a seemingly tiny force that had just humbled the greatest armada in known space. We're transmitting terms, Thompson continued. You'll find them surprisingly reasonable. We don't want your territory, your resources, or your submission. What we want is dialogue, exchange of knowledge, a chance to show you that there are better ways to meet new civilizations than through the barrel of a gun. Dr. Emily Brooks stepped into view beside Thompson, her eyes bright with scientific enthusiasm despite the exhaustion evident in her posture. Supreme Commander, your scientists have already detected principles of physics that your civilization once dismissed as impossible. Imagine what we could learn from each other if we worked together instead of against each other. Vexthor studied the terms as they scrolled across his screen. They were indeed reasonable, almost generous. Open scientific exchange, established diplomatic channels, mutual defense agreements, and most surprisingly, shared access to quantum field technology once proper safeguards were in place. Your quantum helmsman, he said, noting a particular clause. They're suffering neural stress from maintaining the fields for so long, aren't they? Thompson nodded. They are, just as I suspect your crews are suffering from spatial disorientation and targeting system feedback. We could help each other's wounded. Show that today's enemies can be tomorrow's allies. In that moment, Vexthor understood something profound about humanity. They hadn't just developed superior technology. They'd maintained their capacity for mercy even in victory. Where the Dominion would have demanded submission, these humans were offering partnership. There will be those in the Dominion who oppose this, he warned. Who will see cooperation with a younger species as beneath us? There are always those who prefer the old ways. Thompson agreed. But today proved that old doesn't always mean better. Sometimes it takes a fresh perspective to see past artificial limitations. Lieutenant Ryan O'Connor's voice came through the comm, weak but proud. The quantum fields never stopped working because they were impossible, sir. They worked because we didn't know they were supposed to be impossible. Vexthor looked out at his scattered fleet, then back at the small but potent human force that had brought them to this moment. In the end, it hadn't been about the size of the fleet at all. It had been about imagination, innovation, and the courage to challenge accepted limitations. "We accept your terms, Admiral Thompson," he said finally. "Perhaps it's time the Dominion learned a lesson about underestimating primitive species and about the difference between conquering and connecting." As the transmission ended, Vexthor watched Earth's fleet begin rescue operations for damaged Kraxan vessels. They had come to this system seeking to display their power. Instead, they had discovered something far more valuable: a civilization that could turn their greatest weakness into their greatest strength, and then offer friendship to those who had come as conquerors. The galaxy would never be the same, and perhaps, he reflected, that was exactly what it needed.